next one, what's the difference between neurotically wanting to be perfect and genuinely wanting to progress along the path? That's a good one, isn't it? One could become quite complacent, couldn't one, thinking, well, you know, I'm not perfect, okay. I knew that. You know. And then not making any effort at all. And yet, tremendous effort is required. And we are talking about perfection. The great perfection. So, the great, absolutely everything is and always was perfect. Anything that seemed otherwise was simply a delusion. So, you know, yeah, perfection. But then, if we hold on to our idea that I'm separate from that perfection, that I'm somehow going to become that perfection, you can see from the start that isn't going to work, is it? So there's a kind of another move that's needed. So what to do with believing in these fundamental things like I exist and perfection exists and there is time and it's real and things are like I think they are. And in the midst of all that, holding on to these views, I now then introduce this other view, this idea of perfection, and it's somehow I'm not it. So it's tremendously complicated. So one has to use those Buddhist aspirations with a very light touch. That for a moment you get a kind of inspiration that it could be that everything is perfect from the very beginning. And that all I need to do is to drop my wrong perceptions. But then if I try to do that, it's not going to work. So there's a lot of difference between being inspired and that inspiration carrying in some sense an adhisthana, power, and then my grasping that as a project that I'm going to do. It's quite subtle, isn't it? It's quite subtle. And you're only going to really understand the difference by keep working with it. Like sonar and the musical instrument. If you know, I think you all know that from the sutras, don't you, where Sona was walking up and down, maybe trying so hard to keep up his mindfulness and his awareness that he was wearing his feet out and he was getting totally exhausted and asking the Buddha, well, what should I be doing? You know, like the Buddha telling him, well, you know, when he was a musician, when you're tuning a musical instrument, what do? Do you just wind it up as tight as you can? No. Do you slacken it off as much as you can? No. What do? You listen, don't you? You listen to the sound of the string, and then at a certain point, it's resonating in the right way, and then you stop tightening and you stop loosening. It's the same with the amount of effort you put into your practice. Sometimes you need to tighten up, sometimes you need to loosen up, and you know the difference by, you have to say it's a quality of beauty. actually. When the sound is beautiful, you stop. It's really the same with Dharma. You know intuitively when you've got the right amount of effort and non-effort, because you get something beautiful. And insight is always beautiful, actually. It's something that Rigzin Shikpa has always been very aware of, being a mathematician, and knowing that when you're working with a mathematical problem, you've got a certain framework that's produced a certain question. So you keep going back to that question and you push that framework, you push it, push it, push it. And you cannot make it work. You cannot get the answer to that question as long as you're holding the assumptions, but you can't tell what those assumptions are that you're holding that have to give until suddenly, he says it always happens, every mathematician says it happens, it comes to you. You suddenly, and it's not even formulated, you recognise it because of its beauty, its elegance, and you know it's it. And then from that down, you then translate it into words and a formula or whatever, but you already know it. The insight came through and you recognised it because it was beautiful. So with all these things where you're asking, how do you know when you're getting it right? I think you have to say, because you recognise the beauty of the right touch. Suddenly it becomes evident and clear. That's the right touch. And when it isn't the right touch, you've got the clumsiness. And the right touch with clumsiness is to just open to it. Yeah. It's clumsy, awkward, doesn't really work. That's kind of more to ponder. We can live with that, can't we? Because the very fact that you find it a bit awkward and clumsy shows that another part of you senses that it could be otherwise. And this again is what Trungpa Rinpoche calls this fundamental instinct that we have. It's the awakened state that's always guiding us, actually. That is our fundamental instinct. It's shining through all our confusion. It's always there. It never deserts us. We desert it, if you like. We kind of believe too much in the clouds. Get absorbed in the clouds and really believe in them. When we stop believing in them, things lighten up and the sun comes through in its own way. It comes to us. So it's good. All your questions when you're saying, well, how do you know, you're not deceiving yourself? How do you know, you're not falling into a trap? That's really good questions. You're going to find out. There's a way of knowing, and you're going to find out. But you had to have that conundrum presented to you in a way, didn't you? In a way that there is a contradiction there. Seemingly, from our point of view, it's a contradiction. If you want a nice, neat answer, so how much effort should I put in? What was the actual question? I've forgotten it. Huh? Yes, wanting to be perfect. How do I distinguish wanting to progress along the path from wanting to be perfect? And in a way, it's not in the words, is it? Because wanting to be perfect might be wanting to progress along the path. But there's a neurotic way of doing that, where it's very egocentric, and you're not prepared to, as Trungpa Rinpoche says, you're not prepared to give up anything. I want to add the spiritual path to my ego, rather than I want it to dismantle it. I want to kind of find another way. I think, no, I want to find a way of making what I've got work better. Sort of, that's where we come from, isn't it? Trying to kind of, how can I be sure I'm not making a mistake? It's like a sort of guarantee, wouldn't it? Whereas opening up would be, I'll give it my best shot, and then I find out. And then the mistake shows itself, and you think, right, that wasn't the way. We'll go forward from where we are now.